All right, so getting started with using SPFX samples, we're going to talk today about how to start using the PNP SPFX Webparts extension and other samples. When we launched Sharing is Caring initiative to assist with contributing to the PNP GitHub repositories, we also started getting some feedback that there's not only new developers to the community that want to contribute, but there's also new developers to the community that want to consume, and GitHub is still new to them. So today we're going to talk about how new developers to the community can start taking advantage of some of these when you maybe are not experienced with the GitHub side. We'll show how you can start using that. So the agenda for the demo is we're going to cover some of the development prerequisites. And then we're going to see how we can find a sample. There's some fantastic sample galleries that have been created by newly awarded MVP, Hugo Bernier. So thank you for those. We're going to see how you can download samples. There is going to be a couple forks in the road that we're going to talk about throughout the demo today so that you're not caught off guard. You'll have options available, and we'll discuss what those options are. And then we'll just take a quick look at development and packaging, some guidance, tips, and tricks. All right, so development prerequisites. The only two things you need to consume, and I'll clarify that in a moment, to consume samples from the PNP repositories is Node 8 or 10. 10 is recommended because it is the newest, latest, and greatest that is supported with 1.9.1. From there, you need a package manager. Typically, NPM is the one that is recommended and comes with Node, so you'll already have that installed. And then Gulp is required. You will then need a code editor of choice. Of course, VS Code is recommended. It's highly integrated and works fantastic with SPFX. And then optionally, you can also install Git. And we'll talk about why that's optional in a moment. So it may be new to you, may not want to install it. There is a path of least resistance that avoids that as you get to that fork in the road. Now, to clarify, when I say only NPM and Gulp, this is just to consume pre-existing solutions. So if you are looking to create new solutions, there's a larger tool chain you'll need, the Yeoman generator, as well as Yeoman itself. But if you're just starting out and you want to learn by sample, then certainly you can use just Gulp, Node, and NPM to get the job done. And the installation procedure for it is right there, npm install -g, which is going to install it into your global node modules, and then it's going to install Gulp. So the best place to start, of course, is aka.ms SPFX. So that's where we're going to go ahead and go to now to take a look. We'll go ahead and come to an open browser. We'll load it, and it takes us to, right here, SPFX, wrong link. Just want to do, and that's going to take you to the overview of the SharePoint framework. Then you can go into getting started and set up your development environment. Now, as you scroll down, you'll see what the developer tools are that are required. So we've got Node LTS version 10, but you'll notice that there's also Node 8 and 10 supported. We'll talk about that a little bit more because there is some things you need to be aware of as we go through deciding which sample you may want to use. But of course, installing Node is one of the first prereqs. And then you'll notice it goes into installing Yeoman and Gulp in the SharePoint generator. But again, for consuming the samples alone, all you'll need is Gulp as defined in that slide. So let's go take a look then at the gallery of samples that are available to us. If you go to SPFX -webparts, aka.ms SPFX-webparts, you'll land here. Now there's going to be a collection of links that I'm going to go ahead and make sure that you have access to near the end. So you'll get those links near the end of the call. You don't have to worry about writing all this down now. And you can go to the sample sections right here up in the menu. There is a sample section. Now, if you click there, this new gallery is fantastic. It's going to go ahead and let you scan through and browse through the available Webparts. In this case, it is Webparts. There is one for the extensions as well. And you can go through by year, by author, by compatibility, by framework, which shows you the different libraries or frameworks that it will work with or it was built for. Today, we're going to go ahead and go through a demo of looking by SPFX version. And so we're going to come over to 1.7.0 and you can browse through. And this is a great way to learn some of the techniques of SPFX as well. And we're going to go highlight, of course, a simple one that I'm familiar with. So we'll go ahead and use it, dynamic bundling and loading of SPFX packages. So at this point, you may say, great, I see one. I want to learn a little bit more about it. And so you can click on it. I'm going to go ahead and right click on it and open it in a new tab. And it's going to take us now to that sample in the repo. We see that we've now left the nice, pretty looking environment that had been provided to us by Hugo. And now we're in more of the hardcore GitHub, could be a little intimidating environment. So if we scroll down, we understand what it should do. We can see the README. At this point, we may say, great, this is a sample that we want to use. How do we get to it? I don't see a download. I don't see how I would access this. Well, you want to go to the top of the repos, and you can get there by either clicking here, which will take you to the top of that repo, or right here. Those both take you to the top of that repo using the breadcrumb. So that's what we're going to do. When we go to the top of the repo, now we see something that maybe stands out to us. We see this clone or download option. And this is where we get to that fork in the road. We have choices to make. If we click on this, it brings up a little drop down that says that we can clone with Git, or we can download as a zip. So let's start with the first option. If you did install zip, then you have that available to clone. I'm going to go ahead and copy that URL. You'll copy the URL. And then I'm going to go ahead and go into an Explorer window and a command prompt. Now, what I've done is I've set up 3 different folders here to kind of accelerate and show the concept that we're going to show for your options today. We'll start with SPFX Webparts clone because that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to go over into that folder. I'm already in that folder here in my command prompt. And so I'm going to type git clone, and I'm just going to paste the URL that I had just copied. Now, if I hit Enter, it's going to start downloading it. You can see it's already started downloading it here in my Explorer window. This is a very large repo, a little over 500 megs, so we're not going to sit here and wait for that to be done, but just know that this would finish, and then we would be able to go into that folder and see our web parts available to us. Now, that is if you have Git installed. What if you don't? What if you don't want to install Git? The second option is you can download the entire repo as a zip. And so if I were to click on it or right click on it and save link as, it will bring up an option. I've already got it pre-loaded into my SPFX Webparts downloaded, and it will download it as a zip. And you can see it's a few hundred megs, so we're not going to go through the process just for time savings on this demo of actually downloading it, but know that that is a way you could download it. Once you do that, we'll go back to our here, and you can just simply extract it. Again, 500 megs, it's going to take a few minutes to do that. So we're not necessarily going to go ahead and do that. I've already pre-downloaded it for time purposes. So if I go here, back up into my Explorer window to SPFX Webparts, this is what we would be presented with if we were to extract that, or if we were to git clone the repo. We'll have our web parts. And now we know that I wanted to utilize a sample, so we'll go into samples, and I wanted to use the JS dynamic bundling libraries. So now I've gone there. Now this is where you can start actually getting into the code. You've downloaded all of the samples, but some things are needed for us to go ahead and start building this. We'll want to do an npm install so that we get our node modules. And you'll notice that the node module is already there. We'll talk about that in a moment. I preloaded that as well for time. So I'm going to copy that URL, and I'm going to go ahead and do a clear screen here. We're going to move to that location in my Explorer window. And just to make sure that everything looks right, we know we had to have node installed. We know that we needed to have gulp installed. So we see there that version 10.18 is the current latest version of Node LTS that's supported. And we have gulp installed, and we have npm installed right here as we're doing an npm list and checking for our node version. So at this point, we would be fully ready to do an npm install. But there's one thing, if you're new to the development environment, you may not know, and that is that SharePoint Framework has not always supported version 10.1 or version 10 of Node. And so at a certain point in history, specifically SharePoint Framework 1.8.2 is where that support for Node 10 began. And eventually Node 8 will be removed, but is still supported. So at this point, if we were to try to do a build or a npm install or a gulp serve using Node, we would eventually run into some errors. And so you may say, well, okay, well, now I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. You told me to install version 10. I've done that, but now you're telling me that version, a sample from less than version 1.8.2 has been used. What do I do? Typically, you would have to go in and uninstall Node 10 and reinstall Node 8, and that is fully supported if you want to do that. There is a better option that is available to you, and it's called NVM. And there's an article here by Andrew Connell, which talks about node management with Node Version Manager. It is supported on both Linux, Mac, as well as Windows. And so again, I'll include this link, but allows you to swap between versions of Node, and with that, different global NPM packages. So that's the use case that I am going to be demoing today and showing off. I encourage it. It is not required. You could uninstall and reinstall Node if you wanted to the version that is supported by the sample that you're using, but it is important to be aware of that, and that's why I wanted to point it out, that if you are using a sample based on a version of SPFX that's less than 1.8.2, and you try to do installs and builds and serves, then you're going to probably run into issues, and so you want to be aware of that. So now let's go ahead and we'll go back here and we'll try to make sense of that. So using NVM, there's that article on it. I encourage you. There's a lot of documentation, so we're not going to dive into how to use it, but I'm simply going to show how to switch between versions of Node. So I said NVM use 8.17, which we know is supported for 1.7.1. We want to confirm all of that looks good. So we'll go ahead and do the same check we did before. We see we're using Node version 8.17.0. We know that we are now using just gulp and npm again, so we would be ready to go for npm install, and we could go ahead and do that. Now again, I had mentioned I had already done that here, so we already have that. It takes some time on machines, and so I wanted to save that time for us just to sit here in silence. And so now we're ready to go ahead and gulp serve. I've got my sample ready to go. I'll go ahead and paste gulp serve no browser because I've already got my hosted workbench open and ready to go. And this should load momentarily. It shouldn't take but a couple seconds for this to execute. And there we go, it's running. Everything looks to be executing. It's configuring the Webpack as we see. And we should be ready to load our sample momentarily. And there we go, we're ready to go. So if I go back into the browser and I come over to my workbench, I'll go ahead and just refresh so it establishes a context to my local server. And I go ahead and look for dynamic. We see I've got my dynamic bundling example here. It loads. This particular one shows how to dynamically bundle and import jQuery. So if I click on this button right here, it should give me a message that jQuery has dynamically been imported. So great. Now I know it's working. I've been able to utilize the sample, and at that point, I am technically ready to package it and bundle it if I want. From there, you would simply execute your batch, and you can type gulp clean, gulp bundle, -- ship, gulp package solution, -- ship, and it'll run through the necessary gulp tasks and the web packing and the bundling of our solution. And eventually, we will end up with a SharePoint folder, a solution with a dynamic bundling package ready to deploy. And that's how you can utilize the samples. Now, if I go back to our slides, here is a collection of useful links. So we've got a lot of aka.ms short URLs available to us to the various Webparts extensions, library components, and solutions. There's also a compatibility metrics that Hugo created that helps maybe keep track of what versions of SPFX are supported by what versions of Node. Andrew Connell is a great article here on SPFX versions of the generator to install, helps understand some of those concepts. And then of course the NVM version manager. And once you're comfortable with consuming, I'd be remiss if I didn't also offer you the initiative to contribute back. So we certainly encourage, as Patrick brought out earlier on this call, to encourage everyone to contribute back. And once you get to that point where you're comfortable and would like to do that, then there's certainly help for you to do that. That's it. Thank you.
Stuff. Thank you, David. Hopefully that will help folks get involved. Great to see that walk through there. Certainly check out the Sharing is Caring resources. So folks, if you have questions, that's a great way to get involved or see how to perhaps make your first contribution or how to use and consume these samples as outlined in the demo here today.